Okay, there's nobody in the waiting room. We have 40 people here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Mrs. Markowitz, we're so thankful that you have a special story for us tonight. I can't wait to hear it. I'm going to mute myself. It's all on you now.
Okay, you can hear me, right, Mrs. Jackson? Okay, awesome. Hello, Village Griffins. I'm so excited to be here tonight. I didn't have any struggle deciding on which book I was going to read. You can see this book it's very old. It's been read a lot of times, and as many good books are, there are ones that you read over and over again. The story I'm going to read tonight is called Auntie Claus. So here we go. The Kringle family lived high atop a luxurious Bing Cherry Hotel in New York City, and they loved Christmas. They kept a Christmas tree up all year round. Mr. Kringle was president of the renowned Jingle Bell Bell Company. Mrs. Kringle owned the fabulous Mistletoe to Nail Salon over on 56th and 5th. They had even named their young son after, well, you know who. Sophie and her little brother had everything. But if you asked, was it enough? No, they would say. Was it enough to have their own private soda fountain? No. They would shake their heads back and forth, or clothes and books galore. No, 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 they would scream. It had been suggested that their great aunt, Auntie Claus, that maybe Sophie and her little brother were given too many presents. You can never have too many presents, sniffed Sophie. That's my motto. Let's see, make sure. Yes, everyone in the Kringle family loved Christmas, but no one loved it more than Auntie Claus. Auntie Claus lived at the Bing as well, penthouse 25C. Every afternoon, Sophie was summoned there for tea. Each day, Auntie Claus would instruct Sophie on a different topic. One day it might be Christmas trees. Always pick a full one, darling, with springy needles. Another day, decorating. You must drape the garland, darling, one strand at a time, and you must never throw it on. After they finished tea, Auntie Claus would close with the words of wisdom. And darling, remember my first and final rule. Whether it's birthdays, Christmas, or even Halloween, it is far better to give than to receive. Sophie wondered about her great aunt a lot. She was so mysterioso, Sophie thought. And this was true. There were many strange ongoings up in Penthouse 25C. Most people considered Auntie Claus just another eccentric New Yorker. But Sophie knew that there was more to her than met the eye. For instance, what was that diamond key that always hung from a silver ribbon around her neck? Just a bit of costume jewelry, darling, her great aunt would say, and then quickly change the subject. Why did Auntie Claus leave every year right after Halloween and not return until Valentine's Day? Just a business trip, darling. And she changed the subject again. Where does she go? Sophie wanted to know. And once again, it was Halloween, and Auntie Claus announced, in 1 week, I am off to my annual business trip. What kind of business are you in anyway? Sophie had asked. That, darling, is something for me to know and you to find out. Auntie Claus had such a twinkle in her eye, and that was exactly what Sophie intended to do. This year I'll have a plan. I'll stow away. Sophie made up her mind. As she was leaving, Sophie said, I'm going on a business trip with Auntie Claus. Marvelous, darling. Be home in time for Christmas, and there's a good girl, said her mother. Do take your mittens, said her father. I'm going too, said her little brother. Oh, no, you're not, said Sophie. Can if I want to, he said. Can not, said Sophie. Can too, he cried. Cannot, she yelled. Wah! Sophie could hear his ear-splitting scream start to fade away as she ran out the door. Also familiar, right, Griffins? Sophie tiptoed into Auntie Claus's apartment. There were so many boxes and trunks waiting to go. Choosing the largest, Sophie pushed inside the capes and furs and wriggled inside. Quietly, she made a little peephole in the cardboard so she could see everything that was going on. Auntie Claus entered the room. She removed the diamond key that hung from the ribbon around her neck, and next, she placed the key into the lock of her old elevator. The door slid open and the boxes and trunks were loaded. The door slid shut. This is my favorite page. You can see there's the elevator going straight up. Vroom! The elevator shot up in the air and out into space. They were going up, up, up. Minutes and an hour passed, and they were still going up. Sophie could feel it getting colder and colder. From her peephole, she would see stars zipping by. Or was that snow? We can't possibly be in New York anymore. I never know which way to go in the book when after that page, but here we go. The elevator landed with a thunk, tipping over Sophie's box. She could no longer see, but she thought she heard cheers. The sound soon faded until it all became completely silent. Thinking it was safe, she climbed out of the box. Where am I? Sophie whispered. You must be the new elf, a little man said. Oh, that's it, said Sophie. I'm the new elf. Who are you? I'm Mr. Pudding, he said. And oh dear, you're in violation of elf rule number 3. What do you mean? Asked Sophie. He pulled a worn green and red book from his pocket. On the cover it read, Elf Rules and Vital Information. He pointed to the section marked dress code. Sophie read it out loud. Always look neat, always look snappy. A well-dressed elf always feels happy. Follow me, he said, and trotted off into the darkness. Where are we going? Sophie shouted. Hurry, hurry, Mr. Pudding called over his shoulder. Only 48 days left. Mr. Pudding put Sophie right to work and in the mailroom. It seemed like a good place for her as any to begin her search. Where was Auntie Claus? And what was she doing here? For days, Sophie lived among the elves, and she did her best to blend in. She slept on a cot in an elf dormitory. She ate her meals in the cafeteria. No one suspected. Every day, Mr. Pudding appeared. Hello, Elf Sophie. Settling in, he asked. The uniform is itchy. The hours are long, said Sophie, and this is hard work. Oh dear, said Mr. Pudding. He pulled out his own green and red book from his pocket. Elf rule number 2. Mr. Pudding recited, an elf's work is never done, but hard work never hurt anyone. Rules schmools, thought Sophie. For weeks, Sophie looked high and low for Auntie Claus, but now it was almost Christmas Eve and she had turned up nothing. Sophie was worried. What if she didn't find Auntie Claus? And how would she get home? And if she didn't get home, how will I get all my Christmas presents, she thought. Just then, Mr. Pudding appeared. Hello, Elf Sophie, he said. Good news. You have excelled in the mailroom and you may proceed to package wrapping. After that, you'll pitch in on the sleigh packing. If I'm not going to package wrapping, then I'm not going to sleigh packing. I want to go home, Sophie yelled. I have to get all of my... But before she could finish her sentence, Santa's voice interrupted over the PA system. It's that time of year again, his voice boomed, and I was hoping one of you would volunteer to go to the coal mines and pick up the BB&G list. Sophie whispered to Mr. Pudding, "What's the BB&G list?" "Oh, the BB&G list," he shivered, "is short for bad boys and girls. Any boy or girl on that list goes without presents, or worse, for Christmas." Sophie swallowed hard. "Uh-oh," she thought. Mr. Pudding continued, "Only the bravest elf would volunteer for such an awful job." Yes, a brave elf, thought Sophie, or a girl who thinks that she might be on that list. She raised her hand high. "I'll go," she said. Oh dear," Mr. Pudding said, as Sophie made her way toward the coal mines. She could hear the chanting of the BB&G elves. Spoiled brats and crybabies, wine babies, and all the ones who don't believe. Here's some coal and here's some gunk. Fill a stocking that smells like skunk. Sophie went down, 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 where it became darker and darker and darker. Finally, she reached the bottom, and there was the list. Sophie looked for her name, but it wasn't her name she saw on the list. It was, Griffins, can you take a guess? "My own little brat of a brother," she cried. "Chris is on the bad boys and girls list." Well, she thought she had gotten past the shock of it, that they do have kind of, a point. But then she pictured the two of them on Christmas morning. There would be lots of presents for her and nothing for her little brother. On this favorite day of the year, Chris would find only a stinky stocking filled with coal and gunk. He will be so disappointed. He will be so sad, Sophie said. She quickly erased his name, but now there was a large telltale gap. There was only one thing to do. Sophie took a deep breath down and wrote her own name instead. The ink wasn't even dry on the page when some kind of really strong magic happened. Right before her eyes, the list, the BB&G elves, and the coal mines vanished. And Sophie was whirling around and hurling through the air in a blur of Christmas red and green. She was up, she was down. Sophie was standing on stage in the grand ballroom, and a clock struck midnight. Santa began to speak. "She's always on time. She works harder than anyone I know, including me. Ho, ho, ho. In short, she does things right, and I would be lost without her. Let's have a big round of applause for my sister." The curtain opened. "Auntie Claus!" Sophie shouted. "Auntie Claus!" everyone cheered. "Hooray for Auntie Claus!" Turning to Sophie, Auntie Claus winked and said, Come along, darling. You must be home in time for Christmas." Sophie was about to climb into the sleigh when Mr. Pudding appeared, and he was waving his green and red book in the air. Oh dear, he cried. "Auntie Claus, Sophie can't leave until she knows the first and final rule. See, it says here, right here, under departing procedures." The reindeer stomped relentlessly and looked at their heads as if they were to say, "Let's go, let's go." "Sophie knows the first and final rule, Mr. Pudding," Auntie Claus says. "I do?" said Sophie. "Yes, you do. Now hop on this sleigh. Let's have a good night." Sophie jumped onto the sleigh, and it rose up into the sky. "Goodbye, goodbye," she called. She could barely hear her aunt's voice over the wind and snow. "I knew you had it in you. Merry Christmas, darling." The sleigh picked up speed. "Ho, ho, ho," Santa laughed as the stars whizzed by. Sophie closed her eyes, and her face stung with the cold. When Sophie opened her eyes, she could barely believe she was in her own bed again. She ran down the stairs toward the living room. "Please let him get presents," she whispered to herself. And under the tree was her little brother, with his cheeks red and his eyes sparkling and his belly shook with laughter. "Merry Christmas, Sophie," he bellowed. "Merry Christmas, Chris," Sophie said with great relief. And it was then that she realized Auntie Claus was right. "I do know the first and final rule," she said to herself. "It's far better to give than to receive." "There is something here for you," her mother said, and her father said proudly. They handed Sophie a tiny box with a card inside with a diamond key hanging from the red ribbon. "It's Auntie Claus," Sophie said. "It's from Auntie Claus," Sophie said. "Where's Auntie Claus anyway?" Chris piped up. "On a business trip, darling," Sophie said, and she smiled mysteriously. Suddenly, a thought occurred to Chris. "She's never here on Christmas," he said. "What kind of business is she in anyway?" "Well, that's something for me to know and you to find out," Sophie said to her little butterball of a brother. And someday he would. But that's another story. And that's the end. See, your golden key. Oh, thank you for the round of applause, Griffins. I hope you all have a great night. Make sure you get to bed early so you'll be ready to learn tomorrow. I can't wait to see room 15 tomorrow. Thanks for joining, and all the other Griffins. Good night.
Hi, Mrs. Markowitz.
Good night.
Hi.
You're welcome. Good night.
Bye.
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 Tomorrow. Good night. Good night.
Bye, Miss Markowitz, finally.
Bye.
What are you doing?